Everything has got to go funky today. Says I'm live, but I don't have anything going on. I don't know what to do when it does this. I got good stream, but I don't have a video yet. The public view is not working. Wait a minute. Okay, got one's working. I got good stream, but I don't have a video yet. The public view is not working. Wait a minute. Okay, got one's working. Got good stream, but I don't have a video yet. The public view is not working. Okay, got one's working. To do when it does this. Okay, I got a 4-minute delay. No, 20-second delay. Can't do anything with this. Do when it does this. All right. Let's see. West is in the house. And West is in the house. Okay, good evening and welcome to Zion's Banner. We're going to shut off the timer now, since we don't need it anymore. And camera should switch over. Hey folks, there we go. And so I'm having a little trouble with my display tonight. So I'm gonna go forward as if everything was working. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm getting a little bit of a funny thing tonight. Okay. Hey folks, there we go. And so I'm having a little trouble with my display tonight. Yeah. Okay. Well, so I'm gonna go forward as if everything was working. I hope everybody can hear me. I'm getting a little bit of a funny thing tonight. Okay. Okay. I'm sorry about any technical difficulties. It looks like we're coming back into play okay. Just some funny things going on. I'm getting some feedback, which I've not gotten in a long time. And my screen is not working. So I'm going to keep moving forward. But I'm trying to make sure I don't hear myself as you're hearing me, because that tends to throw me just a little bit. I am thrilled everyone is here. So I'm sorry about any technical difficulties. Shout outs to everybody. And just some funny things going on. I'm getting some feedback, which I've not gotten in a long time. And my screen is not working. So I'm going to keep moving forward. But I'm trying to make sure I don't hear myself as you're hearing me. Okay. There we go. That's a little better. And I'm going to be using the preview screen instead of the public screen. Wow, it's quite an interesting evening. But it's still working out. So we're going to have a good time, and I am thrilled everybody is in the house. So it is great to see everyone there. Shout outs to everybody. I can't get the thank yous. Try muting your computer audio. Just did that. Thank you for that suggestion. Usually it's on the public screen and I mute it there, but it's appearing a little differently on my computer tonight. However, it looks like we're getting pretty good feed, so we're going to just shoot forward. Um, yeah, I don't know. Let me pull up here and see what's going on. I've got the gain up as high as I can, so if it doesn't correct it, just let me know in a few minutes, okay? Because there is a little bit of a delay, and it could be a function of my settings and the delay. So we'll give it a shot here and see if stability kind of comes back in. Um, but if it doesn't, just kind of let me know. Again, um, it is great. Sound is good now. Thank you, Sweet Tea. Sometimes I don't know what you're seeing. I know what I'm seeing. So OBS has its pluses, and we're still working. I feel like a guy who's just like breaking into radio, and you have these weird things start happening, and you're not quite ready for them. And so you kind of go, what's going on? And but the main thing is, as long as you can hear me and see me, I am totally thrilled. So I will just have to adjust myself accordingly. So hey, let's have a little bit of fun with some updates here and there. Okay, I'm putting this up. This is fun. I had a good time at First Fridays. I usually pray for at least one good conversation. Now, good doesn't mean the person necessarily ends up getting saved. It means that they were moved one step closer. When I was in seminary, we had an outreach evangelism class, and Dr. Glazer said he drew for something called the Ingalls scale. And he said, suppose somebody's at minus 10, okay, and minus 10 is totally opposed to Jesus. 0 is accepting Jesus, and then plus 10 is like a strong disciple. He said, your job is to only move them one step. So I pray for one good conversation. And these two guys are Muslims, which is hysterical. They like went to the mosque and then went to First Friday, which is like really weird. But that's what they did. Um, hey, Ben. Ben asked a really good question. Ben, can you hang out? Because I want to tell the story of that. No, I'll tell the story of that right now. See, I'll go out of order. Um, Banner is the idea behind my Hebrew name. Um, if you were to translate it, um, Banner is what it would translate to. And then Zion's because there's a Bible verse that kind of talks about that. And Jesus is really the banner of Zion. He's really the ultimate banner of Zion. And so I thought, as I'm representing him, I took my Hebrew name and I took the idea that he is the ultimate, where God says he'll raise up an ensign for the nations, and kind of put that together. So that's the story. And I'm glad you asked. It just wasn't part of the prepared material. Um, and I am glad to say hi. Becky is in the house, so that's great. Um, So that's kind of the story there, Ben. I'm glad you asked. It's kind of the skitty, but that's where it kind of came from. And so these were two guys I was talking to, and so that's why that picture's up. Now tonight is Gila Monster night. I got to tell this story. It's kind of funny. It's Gila Monster night at VBS at Hillside. So I am not going to get to see a Gila monster. But I was originally supposed to be working with the animals, which is really scary because we had like a rattlesnake last night. Now, we don't let the kids handle the rattlesnakes. That would be like VBS and explaining to parents why their kids are dead. And so we don't do that. But we had an actual professional, do not do this at home person, who handled the rattlesnake, and she knew what she was doing. And so there's my daughter Gabby, and instead of being the animal wrangler, which might have been a little scary with the alligators and the Gila monsters and the snakes, I ended up doing the missions room, which is really hysterical because I'm a home missionary. And so I thought that was really fun. And my daughter Gabby has done some short term missions in South America, in Argentina and Ecuador. And so we were like the team. And so that was fun. And I'm seeing more folks. Okay, Nishon is in the room, and so in the house, and so that's great. So that was just a little bit of fun, but as you can see, we found the elephant in the room. So there it is, and that was just kind of some of the fun, and it's taken up my evenings a little more. We need to get to tonight's lesson, but I wanted to put a little color and tell a little bit of a story. And there is stuff that I get to do that's really cool gospel stuff when I'm not doing this. So that's just fun. Let's start talking about tonight's lesson. And I gotta put this in slideshow or from beginning. Here we go. Okay, gonna take a second or two to transition, so you might see a blank here. We're going to talk about the Jerusalem Council tonight. Now, we've been critiquing a little bit. Well, we've been critiquing a lot. Let's just face it. The website Unlearning the Lies, which I like to call this series, like as a series, Unlearning Bad Bible Study, because that's what I'm really picking on here. I'm not happy with the stuff that's going on in this Bible study. And so there it is. And tonight we're gonna really dig into the Jerusalem Council. We're gonna see what he says, but I think he's really missing it. And I think he's got some problems with the doctrine of salvation. So we're going to learn a little bit more about that and how it works. And he has some problems with an error that really ended up being a part of things and crept into the church, and the early church had to deal with it. So I'm going to keep moving along here. And we're going to talk about this. Now, I put up a cool smart art here. I hope you can see it. The PowerPoint I'll put up tomorrow. I didn't put it up ahead of time, but that doesn't mean it won't be available to you. It just means that I'm going to backload the PowerPoint, which is a great way for you to remember and still be able to share it. And I want to start again with this disclaimer because I don't want to be known ever as the guy who hates the law. I get plenty of opportunities to teach on the Jewish roots of the faith, and I love doing it. It's a part of my ministry. Remember, Zion's Banner exists to make much of Jesus through God's big story. And so that's a big part of things. The ceremony in the law, or the ceremonies in the law, are great for instruction and edification. They really are, and they're very useful. But that's not the way this guy's taking them. And so the reason I take such umbrage with this whole thing is because Jesus plus nothing equals salvation. And see, to me, anytime you move away from Jesus plus nothing equals salvation, you have moved away from by Christ alone. And so I'm very concerned about what's going on with the gospel and what happens with this as we add things to Jesus. By the way, these guys aren't the only ones adding things to Jesus. Let me be real clear about that. There are a host of things being added to Jesus, including the health and wealth gospel, but they're adding ceremony to Jesus, and so that's a problem. They're also failing to understand salvation. So I want to take a little bit of time and talk with you about what we mean by salvation. Now, there's initial salvation. We call that justification. Okay, and these are out of order a little bit. And then that saves us from the penalty of sin. Sin has a penalty. I mean, that's the bad news. God would not be a good God if he didn't uphold his good standards. And so sin, violation of God's character and our purpose as image bearers, wrecking important, vital, sacred things and his sacred purpose for us, carries a penalty. We call salvation from that penalty justification. Now, it's a part of salvation. It's the initial part of salvation. We get justified, But we don't just stay there, because sin is still at work in the members of our body. Now, if you don't believe me, you can check Romans chapter 7. Actually, you can check your experience, okay? And sin is still there, and we still struggle with it. And we are being delivered from the power of sin in the present tense. See, justification is past tense. Once I'm justified, that becomes past tense. And then I start to experience that freedom or power or deliverance from sin in the present tense. We call that sanctification. And then one day we will be delivered from the presence of sin. Now, that doesn't mean being delivered from your nasty neighbor alone. We will be delivered from our sin nature as well as other people's sin natures. That's called glorification, and that's a future event. Now, that's important because this guy is not taking salvation as a whole package, past, present, and future. And so when he talks about salvation with Acts 15, he's going to play a little bit of a game with that. And I think he's missing something here. And I think he's missing something terribly important here that he really, really needs to understand. And so I don't think he really gets salvation. See, there it is again. And that's a little clearer, salvation and then future and justification. And so our salvation is a complete package. It includes justification, sanctification, and glorification. All right? Now, he falls into an error here. And we really can learn from the mistakes that the church had to deal with in the past. And that's why, I don't like this. We need to throw out 200,000 years of Christianity in order to understand the Jewish roots of our faith. I think that's a flaw in some of the extreme parts of the Hebrew roots movement. God has been working in Messiah's body for 2,000 years, and some things have been learned. And the idea that to honor Jewish roots, I need to throw away that rich theological work of God in the universal body of Messiah over the last 2,000 years is just junk. It's just bad reasoning. So there's an error called formalism, or it could be called ceremonialism. That's the use of the forms of worship without regard to their inner significance. Or sometimes it's defined, and it's a secondary definition. It's not where I think the problem is for this guy. It's the basing of ethics on a form of moral law without regard to intention and consequences. I think he's falling into the error that's the first error. Okay, which is the error of looking at the forms and expecting the forms to give us some sort of benefit with God. And so people are looking at these forms in terms of the second part of salvation. They're saying, well, you're initially justified through Jesus, but that's not good enough. It needs to be Jesus plus the law to give complete salvation. And so this is why I'm reacting to this. Because I think he's headed down a path that is what Hebrews is against. That's what the book of Hebrews is actually written against, is that sort of thinking. And so I'm going to argue Christ alone for salvation. And I don't mean just initial justification. I mean Christ alone for salvation. I thought about the words of a song, but I know I'd get tagged for copyright infringement. But there's a song called Christ Alone. In Christ alone, I take my stand. I think that's the key thing here. We need to be careful. Now, this is why I don't do rap like vocab, because you just heard what I did with the song, right? So, and so I think he's fallen into this error of ceremonialism. So let's hear what he has to say.
I've heard people argue that Gentile believers are only required to obey the 4 commandments listed in Acts 15. But is that really what the Jerusalem Council decided? It's time to unlearn the lies. Hey, welcome to Unlearn. My name is Lex, and I'd like to invite you to join us each week as we unlearn the lies and dig deeper into the truth of God's Word. Now let's get started. Understanding the decision of the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 is very important. But did they really decide that there are only 4 commandments that Gentiles must obey? I think we need to take a closer look at what actually happened and why. And certain men came down from Judea and taught the brethren, unless you are circumcised according to the custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. Therefore, when Paul and Barnabas had no small dissension and dispute with them, they determined that Paul and Barnabas and certain others of them should go up to Jerusalem to the apostles and elders about this question. So we see right here that the issue they're discussing is if circumcision is required before salvation. They're not arguing if Gentiles should ever be circumcised. They're arguing if circumcision is required for salvation. So Paul and Barnabas went to Jerusalem to discuss this issue with the other apostles and elders. And when they had come to Jerusalem, they were received by the church and the apostles and elders. And they reported all the things that God had done with them. But some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up, saying, "It is necessary to circumcise them and to command them to keep the law of Moses." Now the apostles and elders came together to consider this matter. We see again that this is the matter they're discussing. Is circumcision required for salvation? As the Pharisees were saying. I've heard people argue.
Okay, he's wrong. He's totally wrong. And you'll see the slide in a minute. We're going to dissect this. I'm actually going to be taking material from my dissertation. Because he is dead wrong. It is not about circumcision alone. And that's why I'm pulling stuff from my dissertation. Let's start to unpack this by looking at the Greek here. Okay, now I have, if you guys let me know that you can't see the Greek, I can go to it in Logos Bible software. But I'm hoping that you can see it from the screen there. The second pane is the Greek. The first pane is the English. Now, I bothered to highlight and bold the same phrase in both Greek and English so that you can see it. Okay? Now, what you see in the English is you're going to see according to the custom of Moses, unless you are circumcised, according to something. The custom of Moses, you cannot be saved. By the way, it doesn't say you can't be initially justified. It says you cannot be saved. See, that's the mistake he's making. He's thinking salvation only in terms of that initial component of justification. Okay? But they're saying you cannot be right with God at all if you are not circumcised, what? According to the law of Moses. Not just circumcised, but circumcised according to a certain code that it is connected with. Now, I'm going to change the slide here but I want you to pay attention to that according to part there. Okay? And see, what you don't see in the Greek, look at it real quick before the slide changes here, okay, is there's no Greek word according. There's a missing thing there. It says according to, but there's no according to in the Greek. Okay, the according to doesn't occur. Now, the English translator is putting according to because the according to doesn't occur as a word, but it is a function of the grammatical structure of the way the Greek reads. So the idea of according to is there, but the word according to is not there. In fact, the words according to aren't there. So why does the English writer get the idea according to the Greek grammar, even though it's not there is a separate word? Well, that's what we're going to discuss right now. And hopefully you can see the material up there, but we're going to delve a little bit. Now I want to be careful here because my Greek professor, I feel almost like if he tunes into one of these, is he going to like slap my wrists here? But this is stuff in my dissertation, and my PhDs are looking at it, And they aren't flagging me on the play here as far as the grammar and the use of Wallace. Now, Wallace is one of the key exegetical syntactical grammars that we used in seminary, and it's a really good grammar. Okay, and so from my dissertation, one facet of the argument is that the phrase customs of Moses, and then you see it in the Greek, okay, ta ethne ta moseos, appears within the Greek, and it's using a datative. Now, let me try and point this out. It's a little fancy, but Greek has cases to it. We don't use case endings in English. We use where it falls in the sentence. Okay, the ball is red. And we say, well, the ball is the subject and red is the predicate, and ball is a noun and red is an adjective, and we know that red is describing the ball. And that's the way we do it in English. In Greek, we have these case endings. So the words can appear in any order, and you pay attention to the case endings. And so if you're looking at this, and again, I kind of wish this was in real time so many times because it's so helpful to the features. But I'm gonna try to hold things there, and I'm gonna show you the little Yoda subscripts at the bottom, okay? And then next to that is this ending here for law or custom, okay? Those are in a type of case ending that's called the dative. Dative. And so those have particular function in the Greek, and this is unusual, and this is what Wallace is pointing out. This is a specialized use of the dative case. This is called the dative of rule. It occurs particularly when the word customs is used or a word like it. So if I'm using a word that indicates a rule and I use the dative, okay, that tends to indicate in the Greek that it's a dative of rule, and then you have the next word, it's Moses in the English, okay? And what's highlighting is this phrase, custom of Moses, is preceding circumcision. So it's circumcision according to the custom of Moses. It's not circumcision as an issue alone, it's circumcision according to a certain code. Circumcising them because the law of Moses says that they have to be circumcised. And this is a very rare usage of the Greek. So if the Greek, if the writer, being inspired by the Holy Spirit, wanted to avoid this whole thing, he could have avoided it easily. And it would not have been a problem for him to avoid. Okay? Now, what's important here is this guy is making the point it's just about circumcision, folks. It's just about circumcision. It's not about anything. No, it's not. It's circumcision according to the law of Moses, which means that you're commanding them, according to that Greek, to be circumcised as part of keeping the law of Moses. Circumcision, because circumcision is commanded, they're obeying the command of the law of Moses by being circumcised. So this idea that this is somehow circumcision in some sort of isolation does not pass muster. Okay, he's isolating circumcision from the rest of the law, but the circumcision is part of that law, and then being circumcised is adherence to that law. And so that doesn't work. Now, I'm not alone in this opinion. And by the way, one thing I note about this particular website, and particularly some of these websites, they don't engage in scholarship. It's like they never heard of looking at anyone else because they're under the false idea that we need to throw away any other scholarship that exists in the church because obviously it's no good because we are restoring the real meaning. By the way, that sounds really Gnostic to me. Like we have the secret knowledge of what the New Testament means, and no one before us since the apostles has ever understood anything about the New Testament and what these things say. We have the inner knowledge. Okay, and that's really scary to me. So let's look at some scholarship here. I'm not alone. Dr. Homer Kent was no small slouch in his day. He taught at Grace Theological Seminary. He wrote a commentary called From Jerusalem to Rome, Studies in the Book of Acts on page 122. You have this. Okay, he supports this position. The customs of Moses is a clear reference to the Torah in general. They insisted every Gentile Christian needed to be circumcised and compelled to keep all of the Mosaic Law just as any Jew. So this was not just about circumcision. That's totally bogus, and it's not really representing what Acts was about. And let's keep moving because there are other indicators that we can find. In fact, later on in the same passage, and I'm going to pull it up and go to 2 here in Acts 15, okay? And I'm going to change this. It's going to take me a second here to bring up Acts 15 and get this. So you're going to have to bear with me while I plug in Acts 15, okay? And I'm going to just expand this window out so you can see it better, okay? And move it down, and I'm going to put it, if Logos will be so kind today, and then I'll bring it up on the board for you. Here we go. And we're Acts 15 verse 5 if you want to pull it up on your personal Bible. Okay, and I'm going to switch this over. And okay. There we go. It's showing, and if you look at verse 5 here, and I know it took me a second, but some of the sect of the Pharisees who believed rose up saying it is necessary to circumcise them and command them to keep the law of Moses. So it wasn't circumcision in isolation, the way this guy would like you to believe. Not at all. And so he's already started by limiting the issue and scope of Acts 15 in a way that isn't being honest. And so you can see verse 5 up there. It's even highlighted. Okay. And then you go down, and what they were saying is it's necessary to circumcise them and command them to do what? To keep the law of Moses. So this is not just circumcision, it's about the law. And it was about the law when it occurred. So I'm going to switch back here. You've had a chance to see that a little. We're going to go back to lesson 1. And I'm going to go ahead and switch back to the PowerPoint here. Okay. And switch the slide. Now I put that up here. Your salvation is not separate, but includes your sanctification. And we started talking about that. But let me give you a reason that I think the author could have made it about just justification here and not salvation or not sanctification or glorification. And I can see that you can see those slides. The Greek word sozo, which has the idea of save in the Septuagint, is yasha, which can mean to help, to deliver, to rescue, or to save. And it can be used temporally, like the Lord protected David from Saul. Okay? But interestingly enough, the Septuagint translators of sozo translate it yasha. They don't translate it sadiq, which means to make righteous. A saint is a sadiq. So tzaddik, okay, to make righteous, which would be justification. They don't translate it as kafar, okay. The vowel markings aren't there, so I'm kind of shooting for them. Kifar, to atone for, like initial justification, your sins atoned for. They don't translate it goel, which would be to redeem, as in the kinsman redeemer. Now, why am I doing that? Because that means that sozo has a broader meaning and is not isolated simply to justification in terms of the concept that's necessary. There's no reason to isolate this and say this is just about justification. Okay? There's no reason to say it doesn't include your sanctification linguistically. And so I think he misunderstands sanctification. Having been saved by the law from the penalty of sin, you are now made holy or saved from the power of sin through the law. That's what he's saying. And I think that that's illegitimate. And when you look at the Septuagint, you don't see that narrowing there. So why is he narrowing it? See, that's a question that kind of sticks in the back of my mind and won't let me go. So now we're going to move on, and he is going to go ahead and say that, remember how he started here. Some people believe that the Gentiles were just to follow these 4 laws. And he's going to make a big thing about why these 4 laws are not what was the obligation of the Gentiles alone. They don't represent what the council was saying Gentile believers are actually obligated to. They're obligated to more. These 4 things just happen to be named. And I'm going to totally disagree with that. Now, the way to do this, and this should read Acts 21. I'm sorry about the when I put it up, I may go back and fix this. So let me bring Logos up for you, because Logos is a little better here. Okay? The cross-reference to Acts 15 is Acts 21. By the way, he didn't do that. He didn't go to Acts 21 to examine Acts 15. Why not? You should. That's the legitimate cross-reference. So I'm bringing this up now, and I'm just going to get to the part here. Okay. And I want to get to it before I put it up here. Actually, let's go to Acts 15:24 through 28. Okay, because that's the actual letter that they sent. We'll go to 21 later. Because even though it's a cross-reference, this is really good. The clear language of Acts 15 does not allow it to be just about. About circumcision. The clear language indicates that it isn't. The linguistical tie-ins don't indicate it is. The Greek construction doesn't indicate it is. And so I said clear language. Look at the highlighted part in the verse there. We've heard some went out from us and have troubled your souls. Actually troubled you with words, unsettling your souls. Saying you must be circumcised and keep the law. Now, what did the Jerusalem Council understand was the false teaching? You must be circumcised and keep the law, to whom we gave no such command. So what they're saying is, this decision is in contrast to the teaching that you have to be circumcised, what? And keep the law. And there you are. The next slide. You must be circumcised. By the way, there's no mention of salvation. In other words, when this letter is written, these guys are already saved. What do you mean you must be circumcised and keep the law to be saved? You're saved. They were telling them that you're not really saved if you don't keep the law. Do you see what I'm getting at here? If they wanted to say, okay, this is just about circumcision, they wouldn't have put and keep the law later on in the passage, but they also would have said something like this. Some have come, unsettling your souls, and they have told you that you need to be circumcised in order to be justified before God initially. And then you could take care of everything else later. Well, it's not what they say. That you must be circumcised and keep the law infers the fact, since it's given to Gentiles, that if you want to really be saved, you need to be circumcised and keep the law, even though you've accepted Jesus. In other words, it's Jesus plus circumcision and keeping law. And they said, we don't agree with this. We gave no such command to these guys. It's almost like the guy who's doing the station, and they write a letter, and James says, look, some of you have gone out among us and are unsettling our dear Gentile brothers and sisters who do not have a Jewish background by telling them that now that they've accepted Jesus, they have to keep the law and be circumcised. We gave no such command to these guys. So really, the Jerusalem Council and the elders never gave a command for a teaching like what this guy seems to be teaching. That's all what I seem to get from this. Now here's the other thing. In verse 28, and you can pull that up in your Bibles, okay? It seemed good to us and to the Holy Spirit. That's the way the verse starts. That we lay no greater burden than these necessary things. And then the 4 commands are listed. Let me bring those up. Okay, and I should be able to do it fairly quickly. But then again, I could be wrong. Let's do the old tab alternate trick here. Okay, now let me show you this because this is really kind of cool. Okay, I go to 15, right? And we go to this. And we're going to go down here, and I'm going to switch it over in a minute. I'm just getting to 28 real quick because I want to get to the letter. Okay. I want to get to the letter, and then I want to switch it over so that you can see Logos. There it is. It'll take a second or two for you to see it. But I want you to look at this, okay? Because I want you to see who's saying this and what they're saying, because this is really, really important. And so I want you to be able to see it because the authority for this decision is even given. And so I'm kind of giving Logos a minute or two to show up. But this is the actual text here. There it is. It seemed good, what? To the Holy Spirit and to us. So this is a Holy Spirit accepted, totally approved of decision to lay no greater burden on you than these necessary things. And then the things are listed. You abstain from things offered to idols, from blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. Now, these particular prescriptions are going to fit into something later on. So hang out with me because they didn't just pick these 4 things out of a hat. There's a real historic reason for this, okay? But we can't get there yet. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint here, okay, and pull that up. Now, no greater burden. So they regarded the adding of the law to the Gentiles as a burden. Now, I'm not saying the law is bad. What I'm saying is it would have been hard for them. It was coming to living the life of Jesus a harder thing than it needed to be. I don't understand why. There is this passion to make life difficult. Jesus' complaint against the Pharisees was, you place heavy loads on men's back and do not lift a finger to help them. Now, I know he wasn't talking about the law per se, but the reality is they said they weren't going to burden the Gentile believers with this, well, it'd still be a burden even later on if they attended synagogue. It wouldn't become any less burdensome. But burden than these necessary things. So let's think about this for a minute here. Okay? These what? These necessary things. So what do we understand by the term necessary? And by the way, I'm just going to check myself out here, okay? But as I recall, the Greek necessary, the word necessary, okay, it's no small word here. I believe it's the word we get agonize. We get of a necessary nature. Um, in other words, the things that need to be pressed upon these believers in the Greek, okay, seems to be what I discern as the idea of the Greek. Now, here's what's important to understand. If something is not necessary, it is what? Unnecessary. Do you see what I'm getting at here? We lay no more than these necessary things. These are the only things needful at all. Now, this guy's going to argue that that's not really what he means. But see, necessary means necessary, except when the context indicates clearly that it has to mean more than necessary. That's a basic rule of interpretation. Okay, it means what it says unless the immediate context or other teachings in the scripture make it impossible to mean that simple meaning. So these are the things that are necessary. You avoid sexual immorality. You don't eat meat sacrificed to idols. You avoid the eating of blood, and you avoid strangle things. Okay, that's all you need to do as Gentile believers. It's not all you need to do now. It's all you ever need to do. Now we're at Acts 21. Look at the parallel language here. Now I highlighted it, but when it comes up, you're going to see the parallel language. And again, I still make the same contention. If you want to understand Acts 15, you have to go to Acts 21. This is what we call a cross-reference. The same counsel and the same decision are being reiterated over again. He doesn't even look at Acts 21 to understand Acts 15. Why not? So let's look at it. But concerning the Gentiles who believe, that would be believing Gentiles, we have written and decided that they should observe what? No such thing except. No such thing except means no such thing except. Not no such thing except for 5 minutes. Not no such thing except you'll take on the other things later. They should observe no such thing, except that they should keep themselves from things offered to idols. Look at the same things. From blood, from things strangled, and from sexual immorality. See, they should observe no such thing. It was settled at the Jerusalem Council that the Mosaic ceremonial law was not to be imposed on Gentile Christians. Paul won freedom for them, but it was not said that it was wrong for Jewish Christians to go on observing it if they wished. A.T. Robinson's word pictures of the New Testament, Acts 21:20. And he's commenting on the Greek syntax. So he's not only in conflict with the intent of Acts 15, he's in conflict with the intent of Acts 15 reiterated and clarified in Acts 21. It's almost like if you miss the meaning the first time, here's the repeat performance, and you still don't get it right. No additions to the law were expected. Now let's hear his argument first, I got to give this a chance to catch up. Well, not really. I'll just keep moving here. Okay. We're going to hear his argument why the four stipulations can't possibly mean that they're the four stipulations. In other words, why it is absolutely ridiculous to assume that these four stipulations were all that was really expected of the Gentiles. His argument is essentially, here's what I'm doing, okay? The four stipulations are just a stopgap measure for you silly Gentiles who can't possibly understand the law yet. And so they're temporary, but when you get your acts together, you will really do everything. So let's hear how he explains this and justifies this.
I've heard people argue that Gentile believers are only required to obey the four commandments listed in Acts 15. But is that really what the Jerusalem Council decided? It's time to unlearn the lies.
Whoops. That's not the clip I want. Give me... I had fixed this and it like unfixed itself. Okay. He argues that what? Are Gentiles allowed to lie and steal and cheat? Obviously that's not what this means. It couldn't possibly mean that Gentiles are allowed to lie and steal and cheat. I have the clip, but it's defaulting to the old clip. Obviously, these couldn't be the only four laws because actually Gentiles wouldn't know that murdering people wasn't cool if you didn't have other laws. So they must have thought they were going to take other laws up later, and this was just like all they could handle because of their poor Gentile status. And if I'm being a little denigrating, I think this teaching is a little denigrating. So let's take a look at, really, is it impossible for Gentiles to have known anything or had anything? Did they have no moral knowledge available to them? I mean, really? If they didn't take on the whole Torah, they would obviously go out and murder each other and do other horrible things because they would have no way other than taking on these laws. We need these other laws, and we must deduce that they assumed that the Gentiles would take on other laws because it would be silly to think that they could murder and steal and cheat, and they would obviously do this and not know anything if they didn't know that. Well, Judaism already had an answer to that. Jewish law and Jewish thinking had already thought this whole thing through as to what God expected from the nations. From my dissertation, the rabbis refer to the Noahide covenant and the laws which they believed are deduced from it as the Noahide laws. Joyce Eisenberg notes in the subject of these laws and their application to all nations. In the JPS Dictionary of Jewish Words, Noahide laws, plural noun, the 7 ancient laws that Judaism considers relevant to all people. These laws were originally given to Noah. The first 6 prohibit idolatry, blasphemy, murder, adultery, robbery, the eating of flesh cut from a live animal. The 7th commandment is injunction to establish courts. While Jews are expected to keep the laws of Torah, non-Jews are expected only to keep these 7 laws. A non-Jew who keeps these laws is one of the Chasidei Umot Ha'olam, the righteous of the nations of the world, and is therefore granted a place in the world to come. Really? The Gentiles were, obviously other laws were expected, so the Torah was expected because the Gentiles obviously couldn't go out and murder and steal and rob. Well, here's the problem. Judaism didn't think they could steal and rob and murder if they weren't under Torah. They believed that God had given previous revelation to Sinai, and when I use Torah here, I mean in terms of the covenant at Sinai. Okay, I know Noah's part of the Torah because the Torah is the 5 books of Moses. I'm talking about the legal constitution and moral constitution given to Israel at Sinai. So let me be clear what I'm getting at here. And I'm using Torah in its narrowest sense because I think that's included in the sense that he is bringing up. They obviously have to keep Shabbat because they'd go out and murder if they didn't keep Shabbat. Well, I guess if they were sleep deprived enough, but I hardly think that that's an argument. Judaism said if the nations kept the laws that could be deduced from the Noahic covenant that God had clearly given and that the nations could clearly understand, they had a place in the world to come if they never practiced the ceremonial forms of the Torah. Ever, ever, ever. Let's move further. This is Every Man's Talmud. Now, I actually have this book. I was just seeing if I could grab it real quick. It's a great book. It's findable. I don't know what it costs right now, but it's a compendium organized by basic topic from a Jewish perspective, basic domains and topics that would be very much a part of Jewish thought and the way Jewish thought would be organized as far as the Talmud. Now, look at A. Cohn. This was done in 1934, page 65. To the Gentiles who were not prepared to enter the fold of Judaism, moral law known as the Seven Commandments of the sons of Noah were offered. It consists of precepts, the practice of equity, the prohibition against blasphemy, blaspheming the name. The name is the name of God. Idolatry, immorality, bloodshed, robbery, and devouring a limb torn from a live animal. Sanhedrin 56a. So the Noahide laws were there, and they provided moral knowledge and revelation as far as the rabbis were concerned, as far as Gentiles. And only Israel was really obligated to keep the ceremonial forms given in the law of Moses. The nations never were. So why, so Judaism didn't look at it that way. The other thing he's ignoring, it's very important, and I bring it up in my dissertation, is the idea of natural law. And I want you to hear this because things can be argued from natural law without even arguing them from the scriptures. This is really useful with things like homosexuality. See, I can argue homosexuality is wrong from natural law. Now, where do I get the idea there's natural law? For when the Gentiles who do not have the law by nature do the things in the law, these, although not having the law, that's the law of Moses, are a law to themselves. They show the work of the law written in their hearts, their conscience bearing witness between themselves, their thoughts accusing or excusing them. So what is Paul saying? Paul's saying that Gentile nations had moral knowledge available to them, apart from the law and all the ceremonial forms. Go figure. I decided to define natural law. I used it in my dissertation. I talk about natural law. The view that there are certain precepts and norms of right conduct discernible by all men. And Alan Johnson, in his Jets article, 25, number 2, called Is There Warrant for Natural Law Theories, 185 and 6, talks about two subcategories: those rules of justice that can be found written in the hearts and conscience of men, and a set of ethical judgments obtained by reflecting on man's ordinary experience, as contrasted with divine laws which may be supernaturally revealed. This is natural law. Paul said the Gentiles had moral knowledge available to them by virtue of bearing the image of God. And so ceremonial law isn't needed. Now, is Paul crazy? Where did he get this idea from? Because this isn't the Noahide laws. Well, let's take a little bit of time and let's see if this is arguable. This is a two-part slide here. There is biblical evidence for natural law. And I'll give you the reference because both of these are taken from the same reference. Okay. Hopefully this will change. This man's universal responsibility to respect human law may be seen in references such as Amos chapters 1 and 2 to the culpability of the nations surrounding Israel in the matter of war crimes. Here it is not possible to argue that nations so accused could be and I don't know why it says and. It should be in covenant relationship with God, which would entail their adherence to the principles of morality in war, as in the case of the Israelites. I may have to check that one. Where did I get this from? Well, this is still from Alan's article on natural law. Remember I talked about it, is there a warrant for natural law? This is from the same basic page. The idea is God held nations responsible for their conduct in the Bible and had the prophets prophesy judgment against nations that had never received the Sinaitic covenant. And get the Sinaitic covenant with its ceremonial laws and its ethical laws and its laws related to war, and yet God still calls them to account through the prophets. By what way does he do that? Well, he does that because there's evidence for natural law. By the way, a lot of our laws are based on scripture plus natural law theory. So I could say to a homosexual, I can demonstrate homosexuality is wrong by the very construction of nature. It is unnatural. Now, we're not doing a show on that, but that is a legitimate argument. Let's go further. Here's the interesting thing. The ceremonial law in the law of Moses was never given to the nations. Absolutely was not given to the nations. Now, where did I get that idea from? Well, I get that idea from the scriptures. Well, that's a good place to get it, right? I go to the prophets and I see what they have to say. There's no evidence and no expectation that Gentiles were obligated to the law of Moses. Because Malachi 4:4 says, remember the law of Moses, my servant, which I commanded him in Horeb. For who? For all Israel. Does it say for all the nations? No. For all Israel. The law was given to Israel. And what's really interesting is not only do the prophets say it, but Jewish thought the same thing. I'm pulling from a book called The Enduring Paradox. Now, there are parts of it I like and parts of it I don't like. I've met the Fishers personally. I don't agree with everything in the book, but it does have some really good stuff, and it has a neat chart in it. We're going to see that. This is his wife, Patricia, wrote this article. It's titled Modern Day God-Fearers, a Biblical Model for Gentile Participation in Messianic Congregations. What you need to know is that Messianic congregations were busy trying to figure out how to live in unity, have a Jewish flavor to worship, and deal with the fact that a lot of folks who attend congregations that are Jewish, how do I put this? I don't want to say Jewish style because it makes it sound like kosher style pickles, but are Jewish in their cultural orientation or practice. How do they deal with Gentile believers? So that's what you need to know in the title. And she did her article. It takes up a bunch of pages. It's 175, 176. Exactly what was expected of Gentiles by the Jewish community at this time and what was not expected. The Jewish religious concepts of the Second Temple period held that other nations of the world, which did not follow the one true God, were goyim or godless. And Paul uses similar language. I mean, don't be too offended, but the pagans were without a proper worship. They didn't worship God. They had a pantheon, and they were polytheists, and we all know that, okay? And that's the way goyim is used, in this term. It's not a racial slur or an ethnic slur. It's the nations that weren't Israel at this time period did have the same access to the scriptures, and if they weren't interested in God, then they were worshiping other gods, at least without the true God. See, she clarifies, and or pagan. However, for the purpose of God's judgment of other nations, including his right to judge them, the Sinaitic covenant did not apply to these goyim, having been exclusively, note this, exclusively given to Israel. Instead, the rabbis felt, as it seems clearly from passages in Genesis 9, 1 through 18, that there was a covenant for all the children of Noah, i.e., the whole world, including not only people, but also living creatures. Okay, we're not going to get into what a dog's supposed to do or not supposed to do tonight. The reality was she's reaffirming that the expectation in the Second Temple period was that God-fearing Gentiles did not necessarily have to keep the whole law with its ceremonial forms because they were given to Israel. It's okay. Look at every man's Talmud in just a second. There were even rabbis that felt that Gentiles shouldn't obligate themselves to the whole law unless they were going to become, i.e., functionally Jews. So this slide's going to come up in a second, but it's going to actually be from Sanhedrin 59a. Now, not all the rabbis felt this way. What you find in the Talmud is you find contradictory opinions, which is just one more reason to reject oral law, which I do want to do a show on sometime. Okay. I do see the questions, and I'm not ignoring you, Steve. Radical love is right. I like to kind of deal with those at the end. Um, Let me take a quick poll here. Does anyone want me to take a few questions at this point in things? Because I could, it's not a law that I have to do that, so I can be flexible here. Okay, I'm not seeing any like real major consensus. Okay. But I like Steven's question, and yes, I will answer questions at the end. Okay, let's look at this though. This is like pretty heavy stuff, and again, the Talmud has contradictory opinions, but it's still worth looking at this thing. A Gentile who occupies himself with the study of the Torah, that's the 5 books of Moses, is deserving of death, as is written. Moses commanded us a Torah, and in area tents for the assembly of Israel. Deuteronomy 33:4, an inheritance is for us, not for them. So the idea that the Gentiles, as Gentiles, were supposed to take on ceremonial law was not a part of Judaism of the Second Temple period. Okay. In fact, there were different levels of proselytes. Now, an argument that's often used is since all the proselytes, Gentiles who feared God and practiced and were accepted by the Jewish community, kept the law anyway, they would have naturally kept the law, and the Jerusalem Council was just addition. And I thought this chart was cool. This is Patricia Fisher. I like the chart, just because it's well done chart. Okay, you have like the total pagan. Okay, and you can see the total pagan on the chart. Way over to your right, she's using Jewish order, which is nice for us left-handed people. Okay. And they could become what's called ger teshuv. So any general wanted to be righteous, i.e., saved. He could keep the Noahide laws. Now he could become what's called a ger hasher, a Gentile at the gate, so to you know, um, dweller at the gate. He would keep the Noahide laws. He probably would go to synagogue for Sabbath, and he'd probably keep some of the ceremonial laws and maintain some synagogue discipleship. Now, if you want to become a full Jew or, a total, complete proselyte, the option existed too. So it's a nice chart. Here's what you need to note, and she makes this point. As previously noted, the God-fearing observance of the law was located between the ger teshuv and full proselyte. Okay. To their observance of the Noahide laws, they added formal conversion, like Cornelius. Yeah, I'm still pondering that a little. Okay? But that just indicates that, a God-fearer might be a little zealous and might pick up some of the Sabbath laws. By the way, you note that they didn't necessarily keep circumcision, Passover, because keep Passover, you had to be circumcised. All right, let's draw some conclusions. The Jerusalem Council is too about the law. The Jerusalem Council never envisioned Gentiles adhering to the law in its entirety. So the idea that it envisioned Gentiles keeping the ceremonial aspects of the law, the Jerusalem Council did not ever envision that. I'm sorry if things are a little choppy, but, we had our technical difficulties this evening. I am so thrilled for everyone who comes in. We keep picking up subscribers, and every so often we lose a subscriber. So I'm hoping that we could just keep building, spread the word. Next week, I'm probably going to end up dealing with William Lane Craig, who I really like and respect, but he was with Ben Shapiro, and he said one or two things in the interview, and I think he gave Ben Shapiro an out as far as believing in Jesus that he shouldn't have given, and it really kind of burdened me and disappointed me. So, yes, the Jerusalem Council did not envision Gentiles keeping ceremonial law or the law in its entirety, and yes, it was about the law. Okay, we have some questions, so I'm going to leave that slide up there so we can do the questions. So we are talking about moral natural laws versus ceremonial laws. Yes, also some civil laws. Please don't go out and kill your medium and then get picked up by the police. So yeah, moral laws and then natural laws. Gentiles were to follow moral laws, but not Israel's ceremonial law. Yes, you will find a few things in there that look a little strange, like not eating blood. Can't really say that that's a moral law, but the church envisioned the Gentiles following the teaching of Jesus and the moral law as it was carried out and taught by him. Okay, and that's what you find. You'll find that the moral laws of the Torah are pretty much reiterated because they're grounded in God's character. So here's really what the early church said. Any law of Moses which is carried over, reiterated by Jesus, or grounded in God's character and applicable for the church is automatically carried over. I hope that kind of made sense. If it's grounded in God's character, like marriage is a creational thing, or it's as it's still applicable, and as Jesus carries parts of the law over, Jesus is teaching and those parts of the law are applicable. So I don't know how that did, but that's kind of where we're at. So here's what I say. Yeah, can Gentiles murder and steal? No. Can Christians murder and steal and rob and pillage? Absolutely not. Why? Because they keep the Sabbath? No. It doesn't have to do with the Sabbath. They were never envisioned as being required to keep Israel's ceremonial forms. And he is wrong to say that Acts 15 did envision them being required to keep Israel's ceremonial forms. Is the law good? For instruction and edification, it's good. And if a Gentile wants to do something from the law, I have no problem with it. If he's in a community, like a Messianic congregation, and he wants to love on his brothers and sisters and not create offense, and he is chosen to be a part of that community, I have no problem with that either. But the idea that the Jerusalem Council expected Gentiles to do that, and it was Jesus plus the law equals total salvation, is totally false, and it interferes with the gospel. Because your salvation is not simply your initial justification, but it also carries on in your sanctification and your eventual glorification. Christ alone. And so that was tonight. And I think that was the only question I saw. I saw a few neat comments. Jesus loved the law, but he knew it could not save and it could not sanctify. That's Romans 7 and 8. Who will deliver me from this body of death? And so it could not sanctify. It could teach us about God, but it couldn't change us into God-likeness. So, all right, I am thrilled everyone's here. I'd like to encourage you, if you could pass it along, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, because we want to build up the number of subscribers. And I'm going to go ahead and say good night. Thank you all for being here. Let me, man, I don't know if I can type. You know, when we get more subscribers, it's going to be even harder for me to type my goodbyes. But that's okay, because that's the type of problem I want. And so I am thrilled with that sort of problem if we end up with it. I'm just looking down the list here. All right. So I'm going to start saying goodnight tomorrow. I don't know what type of critters we'll have at Vacation Bible School. Oh, thanks for the encouragement, guys. I absolutely love it. So, ooh, I am not a good typist. There we go. Yeah, let me get a good night to all you guys. I love you hanging out with me. This is fun. Ooh, I think I ran out of space. Let's see if I got everybody. Okay, I think I got everybody. If I didn't give you a shout out, I am thrilled you were here, and I'm going to kind of close off for tonight. And God's blessings on the rest of your evening.